Hey YouTubers, Vincent Romano 26 here, and today I'm going to be talking about, you guessed it, why I dislike the 1950s. For those of you who've watched my previous video on why I like the 1950s, this is the second part of it on why I don't like the 1950s, because it was not the perfect era, as you can see in some of these pictures here. But I will be getting to a few of the topics that I'll be discussing, so please stay tuned. So, when you guys hear of the 1950s, what are things that you don't like about this era? When I think of things that I don't like of the 1950s, I consider it to be very racist, very sexist. I think of divorce, gay hate, and no talk of sex. And I'm not just talking about racism towards African Americans, I'm talking about racism towards Japanese Americans. Just during World War II, the Japanese were kind of like how we perceive the Arab nation of today, or even Russians, communist, people like that. Like, we didn't trust anybody. And I know this WMH West Big Minstrel Jubilee is not necessarily from the 50s, but you get what I'm trying to get at here, with the stereotype of an African American's lips being big, and, big eyes, and just, you get my point. This is totally offensive to me, but again, I'm only using it for educational purposes. What kind of scumbag thinks it's okay to put that word and use it as an ad for matches? That's just sickening. Again, we didn't talk about sex in the 50s. It just was not something people did. And divorce, and I chose a celebrity couple, Elizabeth Taylor and Nikki Hilton. As many of you know, Liz Taylor married, I think, 8 men in her lifespan. So the first thing we're going to talk about is sexism. Now, I don't really have any facts or anything, but I'm just going to show you some ads here. So this one's from World War II. The soldiers need our help. Gather round, American women. Turns out you gals are useful after all. So what are you trying to say here? That women were lazy and that they didn't have any use? What kind of sexist pig wrote that? Here's another good one. I just showed this at the beginning of my PowerPoint. See, it's a father and son and they're playing Battleship, but look in the background. Look behind the father. Look what they're doing. They're washing dishes. How lovely. So the harder a wife works, the cuter she looks. So what are you trying to suggest? That a woman cooks and cleans and does whatever the heck she did in those days, and she should keep doing it because it makes her look better? Pigs. And here's my favorite one. Sabrina demonstrates the world's finest projection equipment. Her Bell & Howell headliner color slide projector. So what exactly is this person trying to advertise? This camera or her boobs? I mean, let's be real here. This one is completely shocking to me, and I know this did take place in those days. If your husband ever finds out you're not store testing for fresher coffee, it's okay to spank her. Yeah, completely appropriate. Another one of my favorites. You mean a woman can open it? What are you trying to suggest? That a woman's not strong enough to open up a damn bottle of ketchup? Or even better. Ways to please a lady. Get her all the appliances so she can be a slave to you. Cry me a river. So now we're going to get to the racism. And racism is still going on in present day, and it's been going on for decades. But the 50s were particularly controversial with the civil rights movement starting. So, we got Japanese, keep moving, this is only for white men. Just the stereotype of the big lips and, black face, as you can say, and just the way they talk. Golly, Miss Maria, folks just can't help having a friendly feeling for this here coffee. Just not appropriate. And then this is something that's very, very shocking. This is Emmett Till. In 1955, he was murdered by, I can't remember the name of the people, sorry, but he was quote-unquote wooing a white woman, and her husband found out about it, and he didn't like it, so he and his other accomplice murdered this boy, sadly. Yeah, look at this. Separate drinking fountains for white people and then people of color. How awful is that? And then, just no dogs, Negroes, or Mexicans. Extremely offensive. You have restrooms for white and colored. That's awful. Alright, now we're going to get to the no talk of sex. Now, I know the birds and the bees are on everyone's minds, but in those days, we turned to dirty magazines, we turned to everything, especially boys, because, in those days, sex was verboten, meaning it was not discussed. Our teenagers did turn to dirty magazines for uncontrolled desires. Parents didn't discuss how babies were made. It was kind of taught very quickly, just because it was an uncomfortable topic, even though it is today, but more parents are more open to talking about it with their kids. And parents never discussed what took place, quote-unquote, behind closed doors. And the thought of sex were considered to be wrong, and masturbation was deemed a sin. And in some religions, it still is to this day. Especially, I think, in the Mormon religion. So, yeah, no, that's not happening. So, we're going to talk about marriage, sex, and divorce in this section. In the 1950s, and we're going to talk about what it's like today. So, marriage was the symbol of adulthood in the 50s. And today, signs of adulthood including getting a college degree and getting a professional career, and that's going for both men and women as opposed to it being something for only men. And moving in together before marriage at that time was deemed a no-no. And nowadays we're moving in with somebody before marriage so that way, we get to know that person and what their life is like living under the same roof with them. And people were always told to not have sex until marriage. Nowadays, we're experimenting, so to speak, and we're trying to become more experienced so that way we can please the person that we want to stay with for the rest of our lives. And another thing that's very controversial is the fact that in the 50s, people married young because it fulfilled the adult identity that people craved. However, today, it's more appropriate to marry someone because you love them and you're making that choice for yourself. Sorry, I'm kind of getting stuck here. And nowadays we're marrying much later, and people are having children later because we're more of a college degree society than we were in those days. And divorce rates were really high back then because people were not mature enough to handle the responsibility of marriage, or they just weren't ready for it. And as I said, and nowadays we're prepping ourselves more for it if marriage is something that you choose in life. And today we're waiting to have our children because we want to get out of college and get out of that debt and have our careers so that way there isn't a burden financially. And believe it or not, while the media makes us think differently today about divorce, the rates are significantly lower than they were in the 50s. So now we're going to talk about gay hate. As many of you know, I call it gay hate, but I guess you could say it's homophobia. I should have put it as homophobia. But being homosexual in the 50s was extremely controversial because it was one of the weird things. You were weird if you were gay in those days. So I don't know who this is, but I just found this couple from the 50s kissing. But if you didn't know, some of these actors who were closeted, Rock Hudson, who died in 1985 of AIDS, sadly. Tab Hunter, who is still alive today. And Montgomery Clift, who starred in that movie A Place in the Sun with Elizabeth Taylor, whom he became extremely close with. Marlon Brando, I guess, fits in this category. He wasn't gay, but he was deemed bisexual because he would sleep with men and women, despite the fact that the dude had so many children, it's not even funny. And then, in those days, look at this newspaper ad. Growth of overt homosexuality in city provokes wide concern. Nowadays, it's about guns. And they were called perverts back in those days, if you see this second newspaper ad. So it's sad to think that these guys, had to deal with so much hatred because of who they were. Oh, I forgot to add a thing to that. But smoking cigarettes is another thing that I'm not crazy about. I have family members who have died of cancer because they've smoked for so long. So, there's Lucille Ball with Philip Morris, Frank Sinatra and Chesterfield. We've got Elizabeth Taylor smoking a cigarette, Jane Mansfield smoking a cig, and of course we've got Natalie Wood over here. despite the whole cultural thing, everyone smoked in those days and you were deemed weird if you didn't. Well, I think of it this way. And based on my history since 1945 class that I took last semester, my professor is a historian, so he really gets into details about pop culture and even the culture of the United States and things like that. And he told me, and this is based on his knowledge, that despite the 1970s public health warning that came out about smoking cigarettes causing cancer, people knew decades before that it caused cancer. They just never ever told anybody about it because they wanted to sell the products. Which is really, really sad because, you know, cigarettes, I mean, maybe, believe me, I didn't grow up in this time period. I mean, I could ask someone who did. But I'm sure that all they did with cigarettes in those days were, they just rolled up the cigarette in the paper. I don't think they added any toxic chemicals to it. Like, it was just straight tobacco. But forgive me if I'm wrong, because I didn't live through this time period. So, no talk of sex or any explicit content. So, like I just said, I should have added this earlier, but no talk of sex or anything explicit, so, you know, it really made us unsure about bodily changes, especially for teenagers who were going through adolescence. And having sex behind closed doors, there were no discussions of what happened. No teenager went to their parents for a sex advice according to society, but of course, you know, it's how it works. You know, there's always an outcast of people in any society. So men turn to dirty and naughty magazines for sexual fulfillment. Such as these Man magazines with Marilyn Monroe, and these do have nude photos in them. We've got Jane Mansfield on a cover of Man magazine posing, if you can see her cleavage there. Another issue with Marilyn kissing for the camera. And then, of course, the #1 men's magazine, Playboy magazine. So that concludes my why I dislike the 1950s. I apologize if it was a little fast, or if I messed up my words as I usually do, but I'm getting better. And if you would like to see why I love the 1950s, go ahead and click the card up above. I will link that so you can check that out. So, yeah, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching.